Welcome to 20th Century Music and Arts. In today's episode, we are going to look at how three of the biggest prog rock bands came together and helped chart this new genre in the early 70s. You will notice the change of the name and the lack of intro music in this podcast. Like the prog rock genre, this podcast is evolving too. Please share, like, and comment whether you're listening to the podcast or watching on YouTube. This episode is a continuation of the first two episodes called Prog Rock Does Not Suck, despite what the punks say. This will be episode 3. This is still continuing what I did in Exhumed, but now we just got a simpler name. One name that comes to mind when the genre of prog rock is brought up in a conversation is that of Yes. The band came together in August of 1968 and was composed of singer John Anderson, bassist Chris Squire, guitarist Peter Banks, drummer Bill Bruford, and keyboardist Tony Kaye. They became a touring band and would tour throughout the UK playing covers and some original material. After a successful gig at the Speakeasy Club, they were signed by Atlantic Records. They would record their first self-titled album in the spring of 1969. This album was surprisingly strong, and even though it was more of a psychedelic-sounding album, the band's focused, tight musicianship indicated where their sound would go. A highlight track is the cover of the Byrds song, I See You, where Peter Banks shows off his jazz guitar skills. The rest of the band also displayed incredible musical ability. Bill Bruford's complex drums, Chris Squire's bass anchoring the band, Tony Kaye's use of organ and piano is layered throughout the tracks, and John Anderson's high vocal range is at the forefront of the sound. The band continued to tour extensively before going back to the studio to record their second album, Time and a Word, in 1970. The band had become much tighter, and the musical dexterity of Squire, Bruford, and Kaye, right from the opening track, No Opportunity Necessary, No Experience Needed, a Richie Havens cover, and throughout the rest of the album. However, a decision was made to use strings and brass orchestration on most of the tracks, which was opposed by guitarist Banks. As a result, he was fired from the band and was replaced by Steve Howe, who had previously played with the psychedelic band Tomorrow. Even though he had not played on Time and a Word, he'd appeared on the cover of the US version of the album. It would be on the third album where Yes would find their sound. The band was actually in a precarious position. Their first two albums had not been big sellers, so their label was considering dropping them. Furthermore, their manager had left them, and they were not doing well financially at all. However, with the arrival of Howe, a new dynamic developed with their sound. Howe's playing was heavily influenced by folk and country and western, and he was adept at playing both electric and acoustic guitar. With a softer yet still dynamic guitar sound, the bass and the drums were able to fill up the spaces in between. Squire's ferocious bass was playing more front and center in a way that had not really been heard in rock music before. They rehearsed their material on a farm in North Devon before heading to London to record. What came out was the first definite Yes album in February of 1971, and it was simply titled The Yes Album. Throughout this album, Anderson's falsetto vocals become ethereal when harmonized with Howe's and Squire's backing vocals. This sound is particularly evident on the 9-minute epic opener, Yours Is No Disgrace. This musical odyssey builds up the tension and complexity, yet is completely covered in melody.
On a sailing ship to nowhere, leaving any place. And if the summer changed to winter, yours is no disgrace. Yours is no disgrace. Yours is no disgrace.
This is followed by the instrumental track, The Clap, an acoustic piece heavily influenced by Chet Atkins' playing. After the listener is treated to the amazing Starship Trooper, the song is split into 3 sections: Life Seeker, Disillusion, and The Worm, that's spelt with a U. The song was an amalgamation of 3 pieces that individual band members had composed on their own. Life Seeker had been mostly written by Anderson, Disillusion was created by Howe, and The Worm was put together by Squire. The song changes tempos and textures throughout, melding both acoustic and electric sounds, but is glued together by its focus on the melody. This track is followed by another epic, I've Seen All Good People, which starts out with some naked harmonies and is followed by a medieval-sounding acoustic session. On this track, Howe plays a traditional Portuguese guitar, and the section of that particular area is called The Move. But in the section of the song called All Good People, the bands rock out in a very melodic Yes fashion. Howe's complex jazz guitar playing is strong here, and the heart of the section is the sustained organ notes of Tony Kaye. The shorter, poppier song Adventure is next, and another epic, Perpetual Change, closes the album. This album was Yes's coming of age, and the tracks Yours Is No Disgrace, Starship Trooper, and I've Seen All Good People became fan favorites and staples of their live shows. The album was also a huge success. It sold over 1 million copies and was successful on both sides of the Atlantic. While Tony Kaye's piano and organ playing was an anchor on many of the tracks on the Yes albums, he was apprehensive to play the Mellotron or the Moog. So when the band wanted to record another album, Kaye left and joined the other ex-member Peter Banks in the band Flash. Rick Wakeman was a member of the Strawbs, a band that had both folk and progressive elements. And Wakeman had also done extensive studio work and played on albums by David Bowie, Elton John, Cat Stevens, and T-Rex. In fact, the day that he was asked to join Yes, he was also asked to join Bowie's new group, the Spiders from Mars. Wakeman chose Yes, and the band began recording in August and September of 1971. Wakeman made extensive use of both Mellotron and Moog and provided the sound the band was looking for. However, Wakeman was quite shocked how much the band argued with each other and thought that they might actually break up. However, the resulting album was the massively successful Fragile. It reached number 4 on the US charts and number 7 on the UK charts. The album opens with the amazing Roundabout. The song starts with a backwards recorded piano, followed by acoustic guitar notes. This sequence is repeated over and over again. The guitar starts to run on its own before being joined by the bass and the rest of the band. Wakeman plays the organ, Moog, and Mellotron on the track. This song was Yes's biggest single until the release of Owner of a Lonely Heart in 1983. The album also includes the popular tracks Long Distance Runaround and Heart of the Sunrise, both of which show how the band could change tempos and textures throughout sections of really complex songs. The listening journey is enhanced by the melodic vocals of Anderson, which are backed up by Squire and Howe. This album shows the band at their most musical adept. The cover was created by Roger Dean and symbolized the fragility of the world by showing bonsai trees growing out of a globe. For the next album, the band decided to be even more aspirational. Through an arduous process that took several months, the band would produce. The album included a 37-minute title track that had been conceptualized by Anderson called Close to the Edge, which was also the album's name. He was lyrically inspired by the Hermann Hesse novel Siddhartha, and musically inspired by Jean Sibelius' Symphony No. 7 and Wendy Carlos's album Sonic Seasonings. The song is divided into 4 sections and takes the listener through rock, quiet harmonies, electronic sections, and back to rock again. Side 2 has a few other tracks. It has the more medieval and folk sounding And You and I, which is in 4 parts. Finally, there was the more rocking and upbeat Siberian Katru. Katru means as you wish in a Yemeni dialect. For many Yes fans, this album is where the band really peaked. One member who was convinced that the band could not top that album was Bill Bruford, who decided to leave the band and join Robert Fripp's new lineup of King Crimson. More on that collaboration in a later episode. He would be replaced by Alan White of the Plastic Ono Band, who was joined 2 days before a massive tour that would go across the USA, Canada, the UK, Japan, and Australia. While on that tour, Anderson became obsessed with a footnote in the autobiography of a yogi by the Indian Hindu monk Paramahansa Yogananda. The footnote described 4 bodies of Hindu texts that deal with religion, social life, law, medicine, and art. Anderson was also inspired by The Ascent of Man, which was a BBC documentary which showed how science had evolved throughout human history. Anderson had a vision to create a musical interpretation of the 4 Hindu texts. When the band entered the studio in London, Anderson was quite miffed that they were not recording on a farm, so he decorated the studio with cutout cows and sheep. Ozzy Osbourne of Black Sabbath, who was recording Sabbath Bloody Sabbath in a nearby studio, recalls walking into Yes's studio and seeing a fake cow with electronic udders and a small barn in the corner. The end result of all of this atmosphere was the massive double album of 80 minutes called Tales from a Topographic Ocean. The album consisted of 4 tracks: The Revealing Science of God, what's also called Dance of Dawn, The Remembering, the Memory, The Ancient, Giants Under the Sun, and Ritual, Nous sommes du soleil. This album is long and contains some very beautiful passages, but does really come across as indulgent at times. The album is very divisive among Yes fans. Some find the album brilliant, others found it too overblown and pompous. When the band went on tour, they brought a huge stage production that included structures, a tunnel that the band walked out of, and massive amounts of dry ice. Anderson kept pushing Wakeman to play the solos in a certain way. In protest, Wakeman started doing things like playing with a wind-up toy, waving to the audience with a hand puppet, and eating a curry. When the tour ended, Wakeman left to continue his solo career, and Yes would take a different direction. More on Yes and Wakeman in a later episode. The roots of Genesis go back to the Charterhouse School in Godalming, Surrey, when teenagers Peter Gabriel, Tony Banks, Michael Rutherford, and Anthony Phillips were playing under the name New and On. They managed to get to record a 6-song demo and were taken under the wing of producer Jonathan King. Their name was changed to Genesis, and they were joined by drummer Chris Stewart. They released a few singles in 1967 and 1968, but these failed to attract much attention. Their musical style was a folk-influenced psychedelic pop with an emphasis on lush melodies. They got a new drummer, John Silver, and recorded their debut album, From Genesis to Revelation, in 1969. Again, they failed to gain much attention. They nearly broke up, but decided to continue on with new drummer John Mayhew. Their follow-up album, Trespass, saw the band expand their sound and incorporate elements of classical music and a wider range of instrumentations. They were playing purely acoustic pieces like Dusk, as well as heavier pieces like The Knife. This organ-driven track was inspired by the organ playing of Keith Emerson in The Nice, which was originally going to be the name of the song too. Guitarist Anthony Phillips did not like the endless gigs, nor the musical direction of the band, so he decided to leave. Gabriel saw an ad in the Melody Maker that read, "Imaginative guitarist writer seeks involvement with receptive musicians, determined to drive beyond existing stagnant forms of music." Soon, Steve Hackett joined the band. Mayhew had also been let go as he was not considered to possess the same level of musicianship and songwriting ability. Brought in was the working class Phil Collins, who was not only a great drummer, but had an exceptional voice for backup singing. Like with Yes, it was on the third album where the band really started to develop their sound. Even though Nursery Crime did not sell that well at first, though it did sell very well in Italy, a country that had a real appreciation for prog rock, it was the album where the rock element was brought more to the forefront. Steve Hackett added a hammer-on guitar technique to the band's sound, and while there were still quiet sections, the folk influence of the first two albums had been left by the wayside. Another factor was the theatrical approach that Gabriel had brought towards his performance. He would put on costumes and paint his face while performing pieces live. Two highlight tracks on Nursery Crime are the lyrically morbid Musical Box and Return of the Giant Hogweed. When performing the Musical Box live, Gabriel would put on a fox head and his wife's red dress. This character of Gabriel's would be on the cover of the next Genesis album, Foxtrot. This album was the start of Genesis' rise to success. The album reached number 12 on the UK charts and number 1 in Italy. The album is the first of the 3 masterpieces released between 1972 and 1974. The album opens up with the powerful Watcher in the Skies. The song starts with long sustained mellotron notes. Eventually, a staccato rhythm starts at a low volume that crescendos up to be accompanied by Gabriel's vocals. The lyrics are about aliens visiting an empty Earth, and they were inspired by Arthur C. Clarke's novel Childhood's End and the Watcher characters from Marvel Comics. The album shows the band to be musically tight and diverse. It closes with the 23-minute Supper's Ready, which starts off as a ballad but takes all kinds of turns and showcases a wide range of tempos, instrumentation, and genres. Steve Hackett's guitar playing really shines here, and he makes use of finger tapping at certain points. The musical vocabulary of Tony Banks is vast, and he plays Hammond organ, mellotron, piano, pianette, and even 12-string guitar. The song is divided into 7 parts. In the 5th section, Willow Farm, Gabriel would dress as a flower during live shows. Many prog rock aficionados consider this to be one of the greatest prog rock epics. The duration of the piece makes the listener feel like they are listening to both a composition and a series of songs in a musical. The album was given a lot of praise by critics. For the follow-up album, Selling England by the Pound, the band took the English whimsical sounds of nursery rhymes and combined it with the heavier sounds of foxtrots to record what many feel is the definite Genesis album. The album was a meditation on the decline of English culture and the growth of an Americanized culture. The song I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe became a hit single for the band at a time when other prog rock bands were avoiding singles. The album would go on to be praised by everyone from John Lennon to Neil Peart of Rush to Yngwie Malmsteen to Robert Pollard of Guided by Voices. The tour for the album would go from September 1973 to May 1974 and would include dates in the UK, France, Germany, Switzerland, Canada, and the United States. When the band came off the tour, they began to come up with ideas for the next album at the Headley Grange building. Unfortunately, the previous band that went there had literally left poop on the floor. Everyone in the band had their own issues going on with family and divorces, and the feeling was often tense during rehearsals. The idea was to produce a double album. Gabriel came up with the idea of a surreal story of a Puerto Rican youth who goes on a completely fantastical journey. Gabriel would handle the lyrics and the band would compose the music. Gabriel would stay in a room alone composing the lyrics, and this isolation created further distance from him and the rest of the band. Some of the members had been annoyed that so many of the concert reviewers seemed to care more about Gabriel's theatrics and costumes than the musicianship of the band. When Gabriel's wife went through a very difficult birth of their first child, which caused Gabriel to be away at times, he got little support from the other band members. The band would go to the Glaspant Manor in Capel Iwan, Wales to record the album. After the tracks were put down in 2 weeks, the album was taken into Island Studios in London for mixing. Brian Eno helped mix Gabriel's vocals on some tracks and was credited with Enosification. The resulting album, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, was the band's ultimate masterpiece. This was prog rock, but the album flowed together and rarely got caught up with the same virtuoso indulgence of their peers. It would end up being their best-selling album to date. The subsequent tour was a massive undertaking with a huge stage show, and Gabriel was making numerous costume changes. But the distance between Gabriel and the band was becoming greater. Early in the tour, Gabriel had told the rest of the band that he would leave the band when the tour ended. It was kept from the public, and in June 1975, he played his last show with the band, and his departure was made known to the public by August of that year. We will continue with Genesis and Peter Gabriel in a later episode. The roots of supergroup Emerson, Lake and Palmer go back to when The Nice and King Crimson played a gig together at the Fillmore West in 1969. Greg Legg opted to leave King Crimson, and Emerson dissolved The Nice. They initially wanted to get Mitch Mitchell from the Jimi Hendrix Experience, but they ended up getting Carl Palmer. Palmer was only 19 and had played with the Crazy World of Arthur Brown, and they convinced him also to leave his current band, Atomic Rooster. The band's early gigs included both Nice and King Crimson songs, and the band absolutely stunned audiences with their performance in front of 500,000 people at the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970. They ended up firing 2 cannons at the end of the concert. The band's focus was on showing off a high degree of musical chops, and the band referenced and included classical pieces as part of their music. Emerson played the keyboards, Lake the vocals, bass, and any guitar work, while Palmer took care of the drums and percussion. Their debut album came out in 1970 and was self-titled. It included 3 instrumentals, The Barbarian, 3 Fates, and Tank, along with the rocking Knife Edge, the ballad like Take a Pebble, and a single that was a hit, Lucky Man. The music showed the incredible dexterity of Emerson's keyboard skills, and he would reference Bach, Bartok, and Janicek, along with jazz improvisation and straight-up rock. Emerson would play piano, Hammond organ, pipe organ, clavinet, Moog synthesizers. Carl Palmer showed that his drumming could go anywhere, and he produced complex rhythms that would throughout the album, and he plays an amazing drum solo on the track, Tank. Lake's melodious voice was the key that brought the stew of complexity into the realm of popular music. Lucky Man charted in the Netherlands, US, and Canada. During the live performances, Emerson furthered the tradition that he had done during his time with the Nice, knives in the organ, flipping the organ, riding across the stage. But now his access to equipment it was greater, and the follow-up album, Tarkus, was a unique sounding album. It had a concept where an armadillo is fused with a tank. Before Closer to the Edge or Supper's Ready, Tarkus was the first real extended prog rock track, being just under 21 minutes, and the track takes all kinds of twists and turns as Emerson uses multiple keyboard instruments and creates all kinds of unique sounds. The track will intermittently go into chaos only to come back to the main groove. The second side of the album is made up of 8 shorter songs. Emerson references 2 of his heroes, Bach and Dave Brubeck. The follow-up album was a live one entitled Pictures at an Exhibition. The band played an interpretation of Russian composer Modestko Morgorsky's composition of the same name. This was followed by Trilogy in 1972, a more accessible effort than their first 2 albums. The album was an arduous task for Lake to record with its numerous overdubs, but he was content with the result. His acoustic number, From the Beginning, was released as a single and managed to reach number 39 on the US charts. Another highlight track was the adaptation of American composer Aaron Copland's Hoedown from the ballet Rodeo. This song would be a crowd favorite for years. Prog rock purists were satisfied with the songs The Endless Enigma, which is in 2 parts and is separated by an instrumental fugue, and also by the title track Trilogy. After an extensive tour for the album, which included their first tour dates in both Italy and Japan, the band started to conceptualize their next album. 2 key things happened. The band formed their own record label, Manticore Records, because they were not satisfied by the attention that they were receiving from the record company, and they obtained an old theater to use as a rehearsal space. Another factor was Greg Lake began working with former King Crimson lyricist Peter Sinfield. Trilogy had had so many overdubs that the material had been difficult to reproduce live, so the band made a conscious decision to record music for this album that could be replicated in a live session. They began recording at the Olympic Studios in Barnes, London in June 1973. What would eventually emerge out of these recording sessions was what many fans considered to be the band's masterpiece, Brain Salad Surgery. The album saw the band up the ante in terms of intensity, experimentation, and vision, with an iconic cover created by Swiss artist H.R. Giger that captured the dark futuristic sounds on the album. Brain Salad Surgery ended up being ELP's best-selling record. The album starts out with the band's interpretation of William Blake's iconic poem, Jerusalem. The next track is the intense instrumental madness of Toccata. It was based around the 4th movement in a concerto by Argentine composer Alberto Ginestra. The piece has a wide range of sounds, including synthesizer sounds that get triggered by Palmer's drums. This was followed by the surreal ballad Still, You Turn Me On. After that is the humorous Benny the Bouncer, which sounds like it could be sung along with at any English pub. Then comes the nearly 30-minute long Carn Evil No. 9, arguably the most ambitious piece of music by ELP to date. The title was a play on carnival, and carnival images and references are throughout the piece. It was divided into 4 parts. First Impression Part 1 is upbeat and gives ample opportunity for Emerson to show off his skills. First Impression Part 2 contains the famous lines, "Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends." Second Impressions is an intense jazz-influenced instrumental. Emerson uses a mini moog to imitate the sound of a steel pan drum. Third Impression ends with the epic, almost orchestral sounding, orchestra being created by Emerson's various keyboard sounds, including a computer voice. Brain Salad Surgery was ELP's most successful album to date, reaching number 2 on the UK charts and number 11 when it was released in America. The band went on an ambitious tour of Europe and North America from November 1973, when I was born, to August 1974. Emerson continued his over-the-top stage performances during the live shows, which included playing a piano when it was spinning and suspended in the air and throwing the air organ over so it would feed back. Palmer also got into the stage antics and played a rotating drum kit. When they played with Deep Purple and Black Sabbath at the Ontario Motor Speedway in Ontario, California, not Ontario, Canada, in 1974, part of the concert was shown on TV. After the tour finished, the band went on a hiatus until 1976. On the next episode, we will look at other known and also lesser known prog rock bands that emerged in the early 70s. Could everyone please like, share, and if you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe, and I'll see you next episode. Take care.